On July 25, 2026, in a quiet corner of Idaho, a young woman walked down the aisle to get married. Her 5-year-old son held her arm the entire way. Her famous aunt sat in the front row, smiling. Cameras were there. Hollywood was there. Everyone who mattered in her life was there. Except one person, her own father. He wasn't sick. He wasn't out of the country. He simply wasn't invited. Or if he was, he didn't come. And when reporters finally caught up to him days later, all he would say was this: he loved his daughter, always had, always would, and it was perfectly wonderful for her to celebrate however she wanted, with whomever she wanted. That's not an answer. That's a man choosing his words very, very carefully. So what actually happened between Eric Roberts and his daughter Emma? Why did the most famous aunt in Hollywood end up standing where a father should have stood? And how does a family with the name Roberts, a name that includes one of the most beloved actresses alive, Julia Roberts, end up with a wound that still hasn't closed after more than 30 years? Stay with this one, because it's not a simple story with one villain and one victim. It's a story about addiction, about a sister forced to choose between loyalty and protection, about a daughter who has never once told the world how any of it actually felt to her, and about a father who, even now, 70 years old and sober for 3 decades, still doesn't quite know how to walk back into a room he once had to leave. To understand that empty chair in Idaho, you have to go back to a hotel room, a custody battle, and a decision that changed everything. One made not by Eric Roberts, but about him, by the people who loved him most. And this story matters right now for a reason that has nothing to do with tabloid curiosity. It's happening in real time. Unlike so many Hollywood family stories that only get told decades later, once everyone involved has passed away and their children are finally ready to talk, this one is unfolding in front of us, in podcasts and memoirs and wedding photos, while every person in it is still very much alive, still capable of changing the ending. That's rare, and it's exactly why it's worth paying close attention to, because we may be watching, in real time, whether a father and daughter find their way back to each other, or whether this is simply how the story stays. Here's what most people don't know. Eric Roberts was famous first, long before his little sister became a household name, long before Pretty Woman made her the biggest star on the planet. Eric was already a working actor, already building a career, already the Roberts everyone in Hollywood knew. It's a detail that matters more than you'd think, because it explains something about how this whole story unfolds. A proud older brother, and a fall from grace that happened almost entirely out of the public eye, while his sister's star kept rising higher and higher above him. And that fall was real, and it was frightening, long before Emma was even born. Back in 1981, Eric was in a car accident so severe it left him in a coma for 3 days. An accident he later admitted, with startling honesty, happened because he was high on cocaine at the time. 6 years after that, in 1987, his addiction caught up with him again, this time in the form of an arrest, on charges that included assault and drug possession. These weren't rumors whispered around Hollywood. These were police reports, court records, hard evidence of a man whose life was quietly spinning out of control, while his career, somehow, kept moving forward. It's worth sitting with that timeline for a second, because it changes how you understand what came next. By the time Emma Roberts was born, in February of 1991, her father wasn't a man having one bad year. He was a man who had already survived a coma, already been arrested, already spent a full decade wrestling with an addiction that was, quite literally, threatening his life. A baby girl was born into the middle of all of that. It's tempting, hearing all of this, to picture Eric Roberts as some kind of cautionary tale, a man defined entirely by his worst years, but that would flatten a far more complicated picture. This was a working, celebrated actor, a man who had already built the kind of career most performers never come close to, someone whose talent was never in question, only his ability to survive his own choices long enough to use it. That contradiction, enormous talent living alongside enormous self-destruction, is part of what makes everything that follows so hard to watch and so hard to look away from. In 1991, Eric and his girlfriend at the time, Kelly Cunningham, had that daughter. They named her Emma. And if you're picturing a happy new family, hold that image gently, because within months, that family would be gone. Eric has admitted, in his own words, years later, that he was in no state to be a father. He described himself using a phrase that's almost too honest to be comfortable. He said he was a car wreck. Not because of one bad moment, but because of an addiction to cocaine that had taken hold of his life so completely that, by his own account, he was not to be depended on emotionally whatsoever. He left Kelly when Emma was just 8 months old. What came next is the part of this story most people have never heard the full details of. A custody battle followed, and Eric lost. Completely. He has said, plainly, that losing his daughter was the single biggest consequence of everything his addiction cost him. But here's the twist that turns this from a simple story about one man's struggles into a story about an entire family being torn apart. His own sister took the other side. There's a strange irony worth pausing on here. By 1991, the year Emma was born, Julia Roberts wasn't just Eric's kid sister anymore. She was arguably the single biggest movie star on the planet, fresh off a film that had made her an international phenomenon a year earlier. The brother who'd once been the famous one, who'd been acting for years before she ever stepped in front of a camera, was now watching his own life fall apart while hers reached heights neither of them could have imagined growing up. It's not hard to see how that alone might have complicated an already painful moment. An older brother, humbled by addiction, being outshone by a sister who was now, by any measure, more powerful and more trusted than he was. Julia Roberts, yes, that Julia Roberts, chose to support Kelly Cunningham in the custody case against her own brother. She didn't stay neutral. By most accounts, she helped fund the legal fight against him. Think about what that means for a moment. Not a stranger, not a lawyer. His sister, the person who'd grown up in the same house, shared the same last name, watched him become a star before she ever did, looked at what addiction had done to him, and decided a baby girl was safer without him. Eric doesn't dispute it today. In fact, he said, flatly, that she made the right call. But saying it was the right call and saying it didn't hurt are two very different things. And it clearly hurt, because it would be more than 3 decades before this family found anything close to peace. So, what happened to Emma, growing up without her father in the picture? She grew up to be famous in her own right, an actress just like her father and her aunt, appearing in shows and films that made her a star independent of either of them. She built an entire career, a name people recognized, without leaning on either Roberts, already sitting in Hollywood ahead of her. Think about that for a second. Most kids in her position would have every reason to trade on those two enormous names. Instead, she built her own path, film by film, role by role, until Emma Roberts meant something on its own. And for years, in public, she said almost nothing about her father at all. Not bitter statements, not tearful interviews. Just silence. The kind of silence that, in hindsight, says more than words ever could. If you go looking for Emma's own account of what growing up without her father actually felt like, you won't find it. Not in a memoir. Not in a tell-all interview. It simply isn't there. And that absence of her voice is, in its own strange way, one of the most important details in this entire story. Everything you're about to hear about how this family sees itself comes from one side of it. Keep that in mind as this story unfolds. It raises a question worth asking, even if there's no way to answer it yet. Is Emma's silence protection, or is it peace? Some people stay quiet about a painful parent because the wound is still open, and talking about it would only reopen it further. Others stay quiet because they genuinely made peace with it long ago and simply see no reason to perform that peace for an audience. Without her own words on record, there's no way to know which one is true for Emma, and any documentary, including this one, has to be honest about that gap rather than filling it in with a guess dressed up as fact. Meanwhile, Eric went quiet in a different way. He got sober in 1995. He rebuilt a career that by now includes more than 700 acting credits, an almost unbelievable number, more film and TV roles than most actors could dream of in 3 careers combined. Directors kept hiring him. Audiences kept recognizing his face, even if half of them couldn't place exactly where from. He remarried to a woman named Eliza, who by every account stood beside him through the hardest years of rebuilding a life. He became, by his own account, a grandfather, and something about holding his grandchildren for the first time cracked something open in him. A willingness, finally, to look back at what he'd lost, instead of simply running from it the way he'd run from so much else. It would have been easy at that point for Eric to just let the past stay buried. He was working. He was sober. He was, on paper, a Hollywood success story of redemption. Nobody was forcing him to reopen the wound of losing his daughter, publicly, for the world to read about. And yet in 2024, he did exactly that. He wrote a memoir and titled it Runaway Train. And in it, he didn't just tell his side of the story. He confessed to things most people would spend a lifetime hiding. It's worth asking, honestly, why now? Why, after nearly 3 decades of relative silence on the subject, did a 70-year-old man suddenly decide to put all of it in print? Part of the answer, based on his own comments since, seems to be grandchildren. The strange way that becoming a grandparent can force you to finally look backward at the parent you actually were, rather than the parent you always meant to be. Part of it may simply be time running out, the awareness that grows in a person's late 60s, that there are only so many more chances left to say the things you've been avoiding saying. Whatever the reason, the book landed like a confession booth, thrown open to the public. He wrote about losing Emma. He wrote about the biggest consequence of his drug use being his own daughter. And then he wrote something that reads less like a celebrity memoir and more like a letter he'd been waiting 30 years to send, that he imagined he would remain Julia's brother and Emma's dad for the rest of his life, and that he wanted, in his own words, to move aside proudly and with grace. Move aside, not fight his way back in, not demand forgiveness. Move aside, as if the best thing left for him to offer his daughter was simply getting out of her way. Read that sentence again, and you start to understand something about how Eric sees his own place in Emma's life now, not as a father owed a relationship, not as a man demanding his daughter make room for him, just someone quietly hoping to be remembered kindly from whatever distance she's comfortable with. It's a strikingly humble position for a man to take in his own memoir. Most people writing their life story want to be the hero of it. Eric, by his own words, seems to have settled for something smaller, just not being the villain. But here's where the story gets even more layered, because in that same book, tucked between the confessions and the apologies, Eric said something about his sister that reopened an entirely different wound. Back in 2018, at the height of frustration during a press tour, Eric had told a magazine something almost unthinkable, that without him, there would be no Julia Roberts, no Emma Roberts, no famous Roberts actresses at all. It was the kind of comment that sounds like bitterness, dressed up as pride. And in his memoir, 6 years later, he took it back. He called it asinine. He publicly apologized to his sister, in print, for anyone to read. Why would a man do that? Why confess your worst parenting failures and your pettiest sibling jealousy in the very same book? And it wasn't just the apology. Buried in that same memoir was something almost funny, in a very sibling kind of way. Eric admitted that Julia had specifically asked him not to write about her at all. And then, by his own cheerful admission, he did it anyway, taking a few good-natured jabs at some of her earlier film performances. It's a strange little detail to include in a book about addiction and lost fatherhood, but it tells you something real. Underneath 30 years of hurt, there's still an older brother in there who can't quite resist teasing his little sister, even in print, even knowing she told him not to. Maybe because at some point, Eric Roberts realized something a lot of people realize too late, that being right about who deserves credit for a career means absolutely nothing next to being present for the people who actually loved you. So, did the apology work? Did the memoir heal anything? For a while, it seemed like maybe it had. In interview after interview through 2024, 2025, and into 2026, Eric kept talking, more openly than he ever had before, almost as if once the dam broke with that memoir, he couldn't stop the water. On one podcast, he was asked directly whether his relationship with his daughter was complicated. His answer surprised a lot of people. He said, "Not really." He said it only looks complicated from the outside, because outsiders don't understand any of it, that all anyone else really has are guesses, assumptions, and fantasies about what's actually going on inside a family they've never been part of. But listen closely to how he phrases things, and you start to notice something. He never quite says they talk often. He never describes a phone call, a dinner, a holiday spent together. He speaks in careful, general terms, proud of her, thinking of her, loving her. The language of a man describing a relationship from a distance, not up close. It's the kind of language that makes you wonder, is this a father and daughter who've actually found their way back to each other? Or a father who has simply made peace, on his own, with loving someone from far away? For the Roberts family, that question is still open. And until someone in that family finally answers it, in their own words, on their own terms, the rest of us will just have to keep watching and hoping that the next chapter is a kinder one than the last.